Democrats are now more popular than Republicans, reversing a trend of GOP preference in place for almost all of 2025. That's according to new polling averages released this week by Decision Desk HQ. Here to dive deeper into the polling, along with other data, is DDHQ's chief elections analyst, Geoffrey Skelley. Hey, Geoffrey. So what does DDHQ's polling reveal about the overall favorability of the Democratic Party and how that relates to Republicans?
Yes. Hey, thanks for having me. The Democrats throughout 2025 from the get-go were in far more negative territory than Republicans were. So in the sense that the percentage of respondents in polls who said they had a favorable opinion of the Democratic Party was a lot lower than the percentage who said they had an unfavorable opinion. So the net favorability, so those two numbers together, was very negative for Democrats. And it was also negative for Republicans to some extent, but not nearly as so. And so what has more or less happened over the course of 2025 is that those numbers have started to run closer and closer together, but Republicans continuously had better net ratings than the Democrats until we get to November of 2025, right here at the end of 2025 and into early 2026. The net favorability now for Democrats is now running about even or even ahead of the Republicans. And I think there could be a few things going on there. Democrats at the start of 2025 were coming off of the unpopular presidency of Joe Biden. And there were even a lot of Democrats who were dissatisfied with their own party. So you saw Republicans with much higher ratings for the GOP than Democrats in terms of their favorability of their own party. But now, obviously, Donald Trump has been in the White House for about a year. And I think with full Republican control of Washington, now the sort of weight and general dissatisfaction with the status quo that the public had during Biden's presidency has now sort of shifted more onto the Republican Party's brand. And so I think, and at the same time, I think Democrats with the 2026 election on the horizon are now a bit more, or maybe coming back of Democrats. And so these two forces together have sort of caused the Republican Party's net rating to drift down on average and the Democrats' rating to drift up a bit on average. And what do you have? Well, they're running about even now. And so I think that is a sea change from where we were earlier this year. And it says something about just the nature of politics. If you're in power, the buck stops with you.
Yeah, I wanted to see if we can drive down a little bit on the what led to this resurgence. I have got the feeling that there's been some feelings that among Democrats that haven't been quite satisfied with their party. Do you think that this resurgence is a result of Democrats feeling more positive about the way the party is maybe fighting back against the Trump administration? Are Democrats winning over independents? I assume it's not that Republicans are flocking to the Democratic Party.
No, this should not be taken as evidence that Republicans suddenly have a favorable opinion of Democrats or vice versa. But what you are seeing is Democrats are somewhat more favorable now about their own party than they were before. It's not necessarily a huge shift. Like I don't want to overrate it because at the end of the day, both parties are still in fairly negative territory. But a lot of that comes down to the fact that independents have a pretty negative opinion of both parties. It's just that those opinions are closer together now than they were previously, where Democrats had a more negative rating among independents. So I think it's best to sort of look at it as people who sort of identify or lean toward a party are now closer together in terms of if you're a Republican or a Democrat, having a favorable opinion of your own party. And independents' views are now closer aligned on the two parties. And I think that's just a reflection of Republicans have been in power. And with Democrats now having been out of power, more of the sort of negative perspective that the public has had for a while about politics is now weighing heavier on Republicans.
I wanted to ask you about this new poll that came out from the Bullfinch Group and the Independent Center. It showed that Democrats really having one of their best net favorability scores in the last year. What can you tell us about why this is potentially big for the party, and also maybe why we should take it with a certain grain of salt?
Right. So in that poll, getting back to the fact that both parties are still in negative territory, in that poll, it was the best poll Democrats had in a long time, and they were at net -2. So 39% unfavorable, 37% favorable. And that leaves a lot of people who didn't have an opinion, which may have played into this being such a positive result for Democrats, because maybe if some of those people had been pushed, perhaps they would have said they had a negative opinion, and maybe the results would have lined up closer to what we've seen with some other polling. At the same time, it also could be indicative of a shift, and we're just got to watch more polls coming in, showing Democrats in a somewhat better position. And maybe that gets into some of the sort of the post November 2025 atmosphere where Democrats are feeling more invigorated. You see a few more Democrats saying, yeah, I'm feeling good about my party again. And so maybe they say they have a favorable opinion now, and previously they had an unfavorable one, and that helps the Democrats' overall numbers. Meanwhile, people, independents in particular, looking at Republicans being in power, find themselves saying, well, I'm dissatisfied with the status quo, and who do I blame for that? Well, the party that's in power now, more so than the party that was previously in power. And so Republicans end up struggling as a result of that, or struggling more so than they have.
So we have now entered into an election year. We'll have midterm elections later on in the fall. What do you think this shift in polling says about what how should we be thinking about and what to expect from the midterm elections?
Sure. So, the overall polling picture at the moment is one where Donald Trump's approval rating is in the low 40s. His disapproval rating is in sort of the low to mid 50s. And it's been that way for a while now, quite a few months. And it vacillates, it moves around to some extent within that range. But nonetheless, historically, a party that has a president whose approval rating is in that vicinity tends to lose seats in the midterm. And so unless you see a notable change in sort of how the public is viewing the president, and perhaps a change in how the public is viewing the two parties, if they're, I think, more or less close together in terms of how the two parties are being viewed, that's actually going to work out well for the Democrats, because in a midterm election, we can expect Democrats to be more motivated to show up because there's a Republican in the White House. And at the same time, you may find that voters on average who maybe could go either way, depending on the election, or swing voters, could end up going against the party that's in power because they're not terribly happy with the status quo. And so in this case, that's the GOP. So at this early vantage point, we're 11 months from the midterm, I think Democrats have a lot of reasons to feel like 2026 could be good for them, at least in the U.S. House, where every seat is on the ballot, and with Republicans having such a narrow majority there, Democrats don't need to gain a lot to take a majority back.
Also worth mentioning that these polls were conducted before the Trump administration's capture of Nicolas Maduro. Is there any data out there that may give us a hint as to whether this operation could help or hurt the president's approval?
Yes, and see, this gets back to the whole idea that there are a lot of contingencies. Things are going to happen between now and November that could shift how the public views things, at least to some extent. And so I think when you're thinking about what's been going on with Venezuela, and then also President Trump's continued talk about the U.S. acquiring Greenland, that sort of thing, I think particularly with Venezuela, it seems in the early polling that there is a fair amount of skepticism among the public about American forces particularly being very involved in any sort of long-term operation in Venezuela. At the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that this is like the new Iraq War or something from the early 2000s. I think it really remains to be seen just how involved the U.S. is, what that means for the average American. Does the average American feel like there's something that they're getting out of this? President Trump's been talking up getting oil and lowering the gas price and that sort of thing because of our interaction with Venezuela. Does that actually come to pass? And if people are feeling that more at the gas pump, maybe that's actually good for the GOP, and maybe President Trump's approval rating improves a little bit. At the same time, if it's taking too long for that to be felt, or this ends up being more involved and more of a quagmire, to use that scary word that's been used in the past, with past U.S. involvement in other countries, that could end up weighing negatively on Donald Trump, who's been viewed by many people as being sort of anti-interventionist, someone who wasn't going to get us involved in foreign conflicts. And yet here we are. So does that redound poorly on him? So it really remains to be seen.
All right. Always great diving into the numbers with you. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about as the year continues and we get closer to those midterm elections. But for now we will leave it at that. Geoffrey Skelley, Chief Elections Analyst at Decision Desk HQ. Thanks so much for your time.
And thanks for having me.